For over 100 years, the galaxy had been drowning in fire. Two mighty empires, vast, ancient, and proud, had locked themselves in a struggle that neither could escape. It began with borders, with claims over trade routes and star systems, with insults whispered by diplomats. But it soon became something greater, something darker. The war had consumed not only ships and soldiers but whole worlds, burned away cities and silenced generations. On the front lines, fleets clashed again and again, each battle more desperate than the last. Entire armadas vanished in storms of plasma fire. Planets turned into silent graves. The War Council's promised victory was always near, that the next strike would be the final one. Yet the fighting never ended. One empire gained ground, only to lose twice as much the following year. The other empire bled its people dry, raising more and more troops, feeding them into the endless grinder of conflict. Decades passed, and still the war dragged on. The galaxy changed with it. Neutral civilizations lived in fear, caught between the two giants. Trade collapsed, science slowed. Exploration halted. Every star system watched the skies, dreading the day when the war would come to them. For most species alive, there had never been a time without the war. It was the only story they knew, and yet in the shadows of all this bloodshed, there was one species that had not joined. One species that watched quietly, spoke little and never took sides, the humans. To most, they were little more than a rumor, a young race tucked away on the edge of the galaxy. They had no great empire, no famous fleets, no long history of conquest. Other civilizations dismissed them as small, fragile, unimportant. When their name came up in council chambers, it was usually followed by laughter. Humans? They have no power. They have no voice, alien leaders sneered. They are children playing with fire. Yet not everyone laughed. In the darkest corners of the war, whispers began to spread. Merchant captains spoke of human ships moving with unusual precision. Intelligence officers reported strange patterns in human data networks, silent, coded, and unreadable. And on the battlefield, veterans claimed they had once seen human mercenaries fight, and that those humans fought with a cold, terrifying focus. Most dismissed these stories as desperate rumors. But in time, the whispers grew louder, and then, one night, the laughter stopped. In a war council orbiting a burned-out star, generals of both empires sat together, staring at a shared screen. Across it spread the image of a fleet unlike any they had seen before. Not alien, not theirs, human. It was vast, black, and bristling with weapons. Colossal carriers that dwarfed even the largest dreadnoughts. Sleek destroyers sharp and fast as knives. Heavy cruisers whose guns glowed like the hearts of dying suns. Hundreds of ships, thousands, all moving as one, silent and perfect, like a blade sliding from its sheath. The council chamber filled with silence. One admiral, voice trembling, asked, "Where are they going?" The answer came seconds later. Transmission intercepts. Human fleets had crossed into contested space. They weren't hiding anymore. They weren't observing. They were moving toward the war. Some scoffed at first. It's a show of force. Nothing more. They will turn back. Others shifted uneasily. Why would they gather so many ships? Why now, after all these years? The generals argued, shouted, demanded explanations. But no answer came. The humans gave no warning, no message, no reason. They simply appeared. On the edges of burned star systems, weary soldiers raised their heads and looked to the skies. Scouts returned with shaking voices. The humans are here. Across the galaxy, fear spread like fire in dry grass. Traders sealed their ships. Civilians ran to bunkers. Both empires scrambled to reposition their fleets, desperate to understand what was happening. What no one knew, what no one could know, was that the humans had been preparing for this moment all along. While the galaxy bled itself dry, humanity had been silent but never idle. They had studied. They had watched. They had learned. Every battle lost by the empires was a lesson. Every weapon fired, every defense tested, was data. Humanity had built their fleets not in panic, not in desperation, but with careful patience. And now that patience was over, for the first time in history, humanity was entering the war. It was not to take sides. It was not to claim territory or treasure. It was not even for glory. It was because the war had gone on too long. Too many had died. Too much had been wasted. And humanity would no longer watch from the sidelines. The humans had come to end it. In the dark halls of the War Council, silence hung heavy. One alien general whispered the thought none of them dared speak aloud. If the humans are truly here, the war is already over. The first sighting came from a small listening post orbiting a nameless rock at the edge of contested space. The crew were tired, half asleep at their consoles, expecting nothing but static. Then the alarms began to scream. At first they thought it was a malfunction. So many signals, so many ships appearing all at once. But when the screens cleared and the shapes became sharp, there was no doubt a fleet had arrived. A human fleet, word spread like lightning. The transmission jumped from outpost to outpost, from patrol ships to command centers, until entire sectors knew. At first, no one believed it. Humans in such numbers? Impossible. But then the images appeared, grainy at first, then sharp. Hundreds of warships, black and silver, with hulls that gleamed like polished knives. Carriers so massive they cast shadows across moons. Squadrons of smaller vessels darting in perfect formation. It was not a show of force. It was not a handful of support ships. This was an armada. The galaxy had never seen such precision. The human ships did not drift or wobble. They did not waste fuel with sloppy maneuvers. They moved like parts of a single machine, engines burning in the same rhythm, hulls lined in flawless symmetry. The sight of them was enough to freeze entire command rooms into silence. One alien commander muttered, "No fleet moves like that. Not even ours." Another whispered, "They must have drilled for decades." But none of them could understand the truth. Humanity had not been preparing for decades. They had been preparing for the entire war. The empires scrambled. Scouts raced to track the newcomers. Fleets shifted position, nervous captains reporting strange sensor readings. The war councils debated furiously. Why are they here? Are they with us? Against us? What do they want? No one had answers. The humans did not respond to hails. Their comms were silent. Their banners showed no allegiance. They advanced without hesitation, without fear. Then, after hours of quiet, the humans spoke. Every channel lit up at once. Civilian frequencies, military bands, encrypted channels, the same voice echoed across the stars, cold and clear. The translation was perfect, as if every species were being addressed in their own tongue. This war ends today, that was all. 6 words, and then silence again. Across the galaxy, billions heard it. Soldiers on the front lines, refugees crammed into broken stations, leaders hiding in fortified bunkers. The words sank into them like stone into water. 6 words that carried no threat, no plea, no explanation. Only certainty. The war ends today. On the battlefield, both empires hesitated. Admirals barked orders, demanding their fleets prepare for battle. But the voices of the crews were tight with fear. Everyone had seen the same thing. The human ships were too many, too well armed, too precise. What could stop them? And yet, pride burned just as strongly as fear. The empires were old, powerful, proud of their strength. To kneel to a young race was unthinkable. They had fought for a century. They would not surrender in hours, so they waited. The first test came in the Cathar system, a star still surrounded by the shattered wreckage of battles long past. A patrol fleet of one empire moved to intercept the humans, confident in their numbers. 50 warships, with cruisers and frigates seasoned by decades of fighting. They expected the humans to slow, to negotiate, perhaps even to turn away. Instead, the humans did not change course. The fleets closed in. Sensor alarms screamed. Commanders shouted for formation. But the humans moved first. From the black ships erupted light. Not the familiar plasma beams or heavy torpedoes the empires had used for generations. This was something else. Weapons that tore through shields like paper. Beams that struck faster than sensors could track. Missiles that bent in impossible arcs, chasing their targets like predators hunting prey. In minutes, the battle was over. 50 ships gone. The patrol fleet reduced to silence. Human losses? None. The survivors, watching from distant stations, could not believe what they had seen. "It is not possible," whispered one commander. "No weapons can cut like that. No shields can fail so quickly." But the wreckage drifting across Cathar's star told the truth. Humanity had entered the war, and their technology was far beyond anything the empires had prepared for. Still, the leaders refused to admit defeat. They called it luck, a fluke. They gathered more ships, promising their people, the humans, would be stopped. Pride demanded it. Fear begged for it. But among the common soldiers, a new rumor was spreading, a whisper that grew louder with each destroyed fleet. The humans had not come to fight for territory. They had not come to claim spoils. They had come only to end the war. And if that was true, then nothing, no ship, no fleet, no empire, could stop them. On world after world, civilians began to hope. The Battle of Kethar was only the beginning. What had started as a skirmish soon became the story every soldier whispered about, the tale that spread faster than official reports. 50 ships gone in minutes, not crippled, not forced to retreat, destroyed, reduced to drifting debris. And the humans had pressed forward without losing a single vessel. The galaxy had seen many battles, but never one like that. When the news reached the war councils, outrage erupted. Prideful admirals roared that the patrol had been careless, that the humans had taken them by surprise. Generals slammed their fists onto the tables, vowing that this insult would not stand. Both empires, bitter enemies for over a century, finally agreed on one thing: humanity had to be stopped. So they gathered fleets. From dozens of systems, ships were pulled. Cruisers and destroyers, frigates and carriers, pulled from defensive posts, ripped from patrol routes, even dragged out of dry dock half-finished. Within days, a massive force was assembled, the largest the galaxy had seen since the first days of the war. Hundreds of ships bristling with weapons, lined up in formation waiting for the humans. The chosen battlefield was the Draxis Expanse, a vast stretch of empty space between the two empires. It had been fought over countless times before, scarred with wreckage and silent mines. But this time it would not be empire against empire. It would be both against one: the humans. When the fleets arrived, they outnumbered the humans 2-1. On paper, it was overwhelming. The admirals swore it was enough. They told their crews, "The humans bleed like us. Their ships are metal like ours. Their weapons are powerful, yes, but not invincible." And so they waited, engines silent, weapons armed, as the human fleet approached. The humans did not turn back. They did not slow. They came in steady, dark silhouettes against the stars, unshaken by the sight of the largest fleet ever assembled against them. Their formation did not waver. Every ship held its place with flawless precision, as if they had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times. The first shots came from the empires. Long-range cannons fired, beams lanced across the void, and torpedoes streaked forward. Explosions bloomed in the emptiness, bright enough to light entire sectors. Commanders shouted in triumph until the smoke cleared. The humans had not been touched. They had shifted formation in perfect unison, slipping between barrages, weaving through fire as if they knew exactly where every shot would land. Their counterattack came a moment later, cold, precise, merciless. Human beams sliced through the enemy lines, carving cruisers in half. Missiles bent and twisted through the void, curving around decoys and slamming into carriers. Drones swarmed from hidden bays, small and fast, tearing into engines and weapons before vanishing back into the dark. The galaxy's greatest fleet began to break. Ships that had fought for decades, surviving countless battles, now burned in minutes. Crews who had been told the humans were weak found themselves fighting ghosts. Every attempt to regroup was crushed before it began. Every formation shattered. The humans seemed to know every move before it was made. "Impossible," one admiral whispered, staring at his failing screens. "They're reading us. They're inside our minds." But it was not magic. Humanity had spent a century studying, watching, learning. Where others saw random chaos, humans saw patterns. They had mapped every strategy, every tactic, every weakness. And now they exploited them all. Within 3 hours it was over. The Draxis Expanse was silent save for the burning hulks of the largest fleet ever assembled. Thousands of ships reduced to wreckage. The survivors fled in terror, abandoning their posts, their weapons, their war. The humans did not pursue. They simply stopped, holding position, their ships gleaming in the firelight of destroyed enemies. The message was clear. Numbers did not matter. Pride did not matter. Nothing the empires had built could stand against them. From that day, the rumors changed. No longer were the humans dismissed as children or whispered of as mercenaries. Now across the stars, one phrase spread like a storm: They cannot be stopped. The Draxius massacre echoed across the galaxy like a thunderclap. What was meant to be the proud stand of two empires had turned into their humiliation. The largest fleet ever assembled now floated as burning debris. Survivors, if they could even be called that, limped home with broken ships and broken spirits. The humans had not just won, they had annihilated. Word spread faster than light. Soldiers whispered it in the barracks. Refugees repeated it in crowded stations. Traders told it across star lanes. Everyone knew the humans had fought against impossible odds and destroyed everything in their path. And they had done it in hours. Fear settled in like a shadow. Among the empires, discipline began to crack. Admirals ordered regrouping, but their crews hesitated. Captains refused to push their ships toward human-controlled space. Some fleets abandoned their posts altogether, leaving colonies undefended. Others pretended to follow orders, but quietly drifted away, hoping the humans would never find them. In council chambers, the great leaders screamed at one another, demanding explanations. "They must have hidden allies," one shouted. "No species builds weapons like this in secret," another hissed. Perhaps they found ancient technology, something left behind, but none of the guesses mattered. The reality was unavoidable. The humans had arrived with power no one could match. Worse than their weapons was their silence. The humans sent no ultimatums. They made no offers of peace. They did not demand tribute or slaves or land. They fought, destroyed, and then moved on, leaving nothing but wreckage. That silence was terrifying. Every empire knew what conquerors wanted. But what did humans want? The ordinary people, meanwhile, began to whisper a different story. For the first time in their lives, civilians dared to hope. On backwater colonies where soldiers had been drafted for decades, families asked one another, "If the humans can win so quickly, maybe they will end it all. Maybe this endless war will finally stop." Children who had never known peace looked to the sky not with dread, but with wonder. In their drawings, they sketched black warships, not as enemies but as saviors. To them, the humans were not monsters. They were the bringers of silence after the storm. But not everyone found comfort. On capital worlds, panic grew. Leaders feared uprisings. Crowds gathered in streets shouting, demanding that their rulers surrender before the humans arrived. "Why fight?" they cried. "Why die for pride when peace is coming anyway?" Armies were sent to keep order, but even soldiers wavered. Many had seen the human efficiency firsthand. They asked themselves a single terrible question. If we are ordered to fight, why should we? Spies returned with reports of something even stranger. In systems the humans had passed, there was no occupation, no banners planted, no fleets left behind. The humans had left nothing but silence. No taxes, no claims, just absence. They seemed uninterested in ruling. They wanted only the war itself to die, and so the galaxy trembled. The proudest empires in history, their banners soaked in a century of blood, found themselves facing a young race that asked for nothing. That gave no warning, that simply struck and struck again until resistance crumbled. To fight them was suicide. To ignore them was impossible. And to surrender. To surrender meant admitting the last 100 years had been meaningless. A single phrase spread from soldier to soldier, from world to world, from mouth to mouth. If the humans are coming, there is no point in fighting. And so entire sectors began to fall quiet. Not from conquest, but from fear. Fleets deserted before a single shot was fired. Colonies sent messages begging humanity for mercy, even though no demands had been made. The very thought of human arrival was enough to make battlefields collapse before they began. The galaxy had lived in war for a century. Now the empires could not bear the shame. For 100 years they had fought, feeding their people into the furnace of war, claiming every sacrifice was worth it. But now before their citizens, before the galaxy, they looked weak, broken, defeated not by each other but by an outsider, a young race that had no right, no history, no empire, and so pride demanded one last stand. Secretly, though they had been enemies for generations, the two great empires met in silence. On a hidden station far from the front lines, their leaders sat across from one another, their faces carved with bitterness. They had killed each other's people by the billions, destroyed each other's worlds, burned entire generations. Yet in that moment, They shared the same fear. The humans must be stopped, one ruler hissed. Together we may still have a chance, another replied. And so an alliance was born, not of trust, not of peace, but of desperation. From every corner of their broken territories, they called back their fleets. Ships too damaged to fight were patched together. Old vessels dragged out of reserve yards were armed again. Factories burned day and night, forcing out weapons faster than ever before. Civilizations were stripped bare, every resource poured into one final effort. The galaxy watched as this new alliance gathered. For the first time in a century, the two greatest powers were not fighting each other. They stood side by side, their banners raised together, their combined might forming a single terrible wall. It was the largest fleet ever built. Bigger than Draxis, bigger than anything in history. Thousands of ships, shoulder to shoulder, filling the void with firepower enough to level a dozen worlds. If humanity could be stopped, it would be here. The battlefield chosen was the Varan Rift, a vast gulf of shattered asteroids and gravitational storms. Treacherous space, perfect for ambushes, perfect for hiding traps. The empires were certain the humans could not maneuver so perfectly here. They laid mines. They seeded false signals. They prepared every weapon they had ever created, and then they waited. When the humans arrived, the galaxy held its breath. Once again, the Black Armada slid from the void, silent, flawless, unshaken. Not larger than before, not smaller, just enough. Their numbers were less than half the gathered alliance. To any strategist, it should have been suicide. But the humans advanced without fear. The empires struck first, unleashing everything. A storm of missiles, beams of plasma, gravitational traps designed to tear ships apart. The void itself lit up brighter than a sun. And still the humans came. They shifted formation mid-battle, each move precise, each ship acting as if guided by one mind. Weapons cut through the storm with surgical precision. Mines were disarmed before they could detonate. Ambushes turned to nothing. It was as though the humans had known every trap before it was even laid. Panic rippled through the Allied fleet. Admirals barked orders, but their commands were too slow. The humans were always one step ahead, countering every maneuver before it began. Their weapons tore into the alliance like claws into flesh. Cruisers erupted, carriers split apart. Battleships that had stood for decades crumbled in minutes. Some commanders refused to believe it. "Hold formation!" they screamed even as their ships burned. Others begged for retreat, but there was nowhere to run. The humans were everywhere, their weapons cutting through the heart of the fleet, leaving only wreckage in their wake. What was supposed to be the proudest moment in galactic history turned into its darkest humiliation. The greatest fleet ever built was broken in less than 4 hours. When the smoke cleared, the Varan Rift was filled with silence. Thousands of wrecks drifted among the asteroids, their flames casting shadows across the rocks. The alliance that had cost so much to build was gone, crushed as if it had never existed. And there, in the center of it all, stood the human armada, untouched, unyielding. The galaxy had waited for a turning point, a moment when the endless war would finally shift. That moment had come, but it was not the empires who had seized it. It was humanity. From that day forward, no one asked if the humans could end the war. They asked only how long they would allow it to continue. The Varan Rift was a graveyard. Wreckage drifted in silence, the hulks of thousands of ships tumbling through the void. Fires flickered weakly in shattered hulls, their light swallowed by the endless dark. No one spoke. No one dared. For the first time in a century, the galaxy's greatest fleets were gone, not reduced, not battered, but utterly erased. And yet, the humans did not advance. They did not claim territory. They did not seize planets. They did not raise banners or demand surrender. Their armada simply halted, engines dimming, weapons cooling as if the slaughter had never happened. The survivors, broken ships limping away from the rift, watched in confusion and fear. Why stop now? Why not crush what was left? The answer came hours later. Every channel lit up again. Civilian, military, encrypted, open. From the core worlds to the smallest colonies, the same message echoed, spoken in that same calm, unshaken voice that had once declared the war's end. No more war, ever. The words carried no threat, no demands, no conditions. Only certainty, as heavy as the silence after thunder. In council chambers across the galaxy, rulers collapsed into arguments. Some shouted to fight again, to rebuild, to resist until their last breath. Others broke down, begging to surrender, anything to avoid another slaughter. In the streets, citizens did not wait for orders. They gathered in masses, crying for peace, demanding that their leaders stop the bloodshed before humanity returned. On the front lines, soldiers lowered their weapons. For decades they had fired without question, obeyed without hesitation. Now they stared at the stars where the humans waited, and they felt something they had never felt before. Hope, yet it was a heavy hope, edged with fear. The humans had given no explanation, no kindness, no mercy. They had not come as conquerors, but neither had they come as saviors. Their message was simple. The war was over because they had decided it was over. And if anyone dared to test them, if anyone lit the fires of war again, every soldier, every leader, every citizen knew what that would mean. The humans would return. And next time it would not take hours. It would take minutes. In that silence after the storm, the galaxy understood. Their fate was no longer in their own hands. It rested in the shadow of a young species that had come from nowhere, struck like lightning and left them trembling. The endless war was finished. Not with treaties, not with surrender. When the guns finally fell silent, the galaxy found itself in a strange new world. For the first time in living memory, no battles raged on the borders. No fleets clashed in the void. No worlds burned under the fury of ancient rivals. The war that had defined generations had ended, not with a treaty, not with surrender, but with the arrival of a single species that refused to let it continue. The humans did not stay. Their armada vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, slipping back into the dark. They left behind no occupation forces, no governors, no demands for tribute. The only evidence of their presence was the graveyards of wrecked ships that littered battlefields across a dozen systems, and their message echoing still. No more war ever. In the months that followed, the empires faltered. Leaders who had built their power on endless conflict found themselves powerless. Their citizens no longer obeyed calls to arms. Factories that had churned out weapons for decades stood silent. Refugees, once scattered and desperate, began to return home. Children grew up under skies no longer filled with fire. Yet peace was not easy. Suspicion lingered. Old hatreds smoldered. Treaties were written, broken, and written again. But always, above every council chamber and every negotiation, there was the unspoken reminder: if war begins again, the humans will return. That fear alone kept the peace. Over time, stories of humanity grew. Some painted them as saviors, guardians who had ended centuries of bloodshed. Others whispered they were monsters, too powerful, too cold, a shadow hanging over the galaxy. To many, they were both. Generations later, children still asked their parents about the day humanity entered the war. Elders spoke of the silence that followed the greatest battles, of the black ships that cut through fleets like knives through paper, of the 6 words that ended an age of suffering. And though no one knew when or if the humans would ever come again, every world remembered the truth. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever, not through conquest, not through diplomacy, but through power wielded with terrifying certainty. And so the galaxy lived in peace, but always with a quiet prayer on its lips that humanity would never need to go to war again. Peace settled. But it was not a gentle peace. The galaxy was quiet now, its skies no longer burning with constant battles. Yet in the silence, unease grew. Every empire, every colony, every people lived with the memory of what had happened. Humanity had not only ended the war, they had proven they could end any war at any time. The rulers who had once commanded fleets with arrogance now found themselves stripped of power. Their armies would not obey. Their citizens demanded peace. Even when new disputes arose over territory, over trade, over old grudges, no one dared to push too far. The memory of black warships rising from the void haunted every council chamber. Still, whispers filled the galaxy. Some called the humans guardians, the only ones strong enough to force peace. Others called them tyrants in shadows, rulers who had taken control without ever planting a flag. And some believed the humans were only waiting, that they had ended one war but were preparing for another. On border worlds, children played games where they pretended to be human captains, ending battles with a single command. On capital planets, poets wrote verses about the silent blades of Earth, the ships that cut wars apart in hours. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, in the dark places where spies and soldiers still whispered, there was a deeper fear. What if the humans had not vanished at all? What if their fleet still lingered unseen, hidden just beyond the edge of sensors? What if they were still watching, listening, waiting for the first spark of violence to flare? Some claimed to have seen strange shadows on their scans. Others swore they heard voices on their comms, brief and cold, gone before they could be traced. No one could prove it, and yet no one doubted it. The war was over, yes. The galaxy was at peace, yes, but it was a peace that did not belong to the empires. It did not belong to the people. It belonged to humanity. And until the day they